There are moments in life that don't scream for your attention. They just slip quietly into the background, like a familiar song playing low on the radio while you drive the same roads you've driven for years. My marriage felt a bit like that song. Comfortable, predictable, a steady rhythm I could hum along to without thinking. We weren't unhappy, at least not in any way that would raise eyebrows. We had the house we wanted, the little rituals that held our days together. Dinners at 7, his hand always resting gently on my back when we walked into a room. Smiles that looked good in pictures, but underneath the surface of all that symmetry, there was something missing. Not love, not respect. He was a good man, always had been, but the emotional space between us had quietly widened over the years, like a seam splitting open thread by thread. The touches had become polite. The kiss brief. There was no warmth in them anymore. No spark that made me feel like more than just the woman he shared bills and plans with. I began to feel invisible in my own skin. I told myself not to create a problem where there wasn't one. After all, how many women could say they had a kind, faithful husband? And yet some days, standing in front of the mirror, adjusting a dress that rested gently on my hips, I caught my own eyes and wondered how long I could keep ignoring the quiet ache inside me. The need to feel noticed, genuinely noticed. It was during one of those slow, steady Sundays that he mentioned his nephew was coming back into town. The words barely registered at first, just background noise between sips of coffee and folding the laundry. He's finally done with that job up north, my husband said, not looking up from his phone. Thought it might be nice to invite him over for dinner. I nodded without much thought. The nephew, I'd known him since he was a teenager. All lanky limbs and carefree grins, running barefoot through our house every summer. In my mind, he was still that boy, the one who laughed too loud and always asked for seconds at the table. The evening came faster than I expected. I didn't put on anything special, just a soft, cream-colored blouse and fitted pants. Comfortable but neat. I wasn't dressing for anyone but myself. At least that's what I told myself as I lingered a bit too long choosing earrings, opting for the simple gold hoops he had once complimented. When the doorbell rang, I was in the kitchen, arranging the salad. My husband called out a greeting, his voice warm, familiar, steady. I heard the front door open, the shuffle of shoes on the mat, the low thrum of male voices exchanging casual hellos. And then I saw him. Gone was the awkward boy I remembered. In his place stood a man, tall, broad-shouldered, his movements unhurried and self-assured. His jaw was sharper, his eyes deeper, and when he smiled, there was a quiet confidence in it that hadn't been there before. He had the look of someone who had faced life and grown stronger through it. "Wow," he said as he stepped into the kitchen, eyes meeting mine. "You haven't changed a bit."
Il smiled back, automatique, polite.
"That's kind of you to say, but I'm sure I have." His gaze didn't shift. He held it just long enough that I felt a subtle flutter in my chest, and I silently wished I hadn't noticed. Dinner was uneventful on the surface. The conversation flowed easily between the two men, catching up on work, sports, light-hearted stories. I listened, smiling where I should, nodding at the right moments, but my focus kept drifting back to him. The way he leaned back in the chair, one arm resting casually along the backrest, his fingers tapping thoughtfully against the wood. His eyes would meet mine across the table, and there was something in them that felt not obvious, not inappropriate, just a quiet awareness, like he was trying to understand something he couldn't yet name. At one point, my husband excused himself to take a phone call in the other room. The silence between us lingered a little longer before the nephew tilted his head slightly and asked, "So, how have you been?" There was nothing unusual about the question. The words were simple enough, but the way he said it, soft, deliberate, made me feel unexpectedly seen. I looked down at my glass of wine, swirling it slowly, giving myself a second too long to answer. "Good," I said finally. "We're good." His lips curled at the corner, a barely there smirk that felt like he knew I was holding something back. Or at least, not telling the full truth. The conversation picked up again when my husband returned, and just like that, the moment passed. But the thought had already taken root. I felt it settling quietly inside me as the evening wore on, a flicker of awareness I hadn't felt in years. When he stood to leave, he offered the same warm smile, the same casual goodbye. But as he leaned forward to kiss my cheek, just a normal gesture, nothing improper, his hand brushed lightly against my side. Not long enough to be noticed by anyone else, but long enough that I noticed. Long enough to feel intentional. I watched him walk out the door, and for the first time in a very long time, I felt a stir deep in my chest. It wasn't love. It wasn't even infatuation. Not yet. It was something far more subtle. It was awareness. I spent the next few days convincing myself that I had misread the moment, that the touch of his hand was just a natural part of a casual goodbye, the kind of passing contact that family members share without much thought. I repeated it in my head like a refrain, the way you say something again and again until it starts to feel like life on the surface moved forward as always. My husband remained his steady self. Kind, thoughtful, consistent in all the ways that matter. Every morning, he kissed my forehead before heading out. Every evening, he asked about my day while I arranged the plates on the table. There were no arguments.
No tensión.
Nothing visible that pointed to anything being wrong beneath the smooth surface of our lives. And yet, there I was, taking longer in front of the mirror each morning, letting my fingers trail slowly across the soft fabric of my clothes, choosing colors I hadn't worn in a long time. Not for him, for me. At least, that's what I told myself. The invitation to help in the garden came casually, almost like an afterthought. My husband brought it up over breakfast, his voice calm, unaware. The back fence needed fixing. Some of the roses had overgrown, and the trellis was starting to lean. He was caught up with work all week, but his nephew, he said, had offered to help. He said he doesn't mind stopping by to give you a hand, my husband added, buttering his toast without looking up. I nodded, maybe a little too fast. That's nice of him. Yeah, he's a good kid, my husband said with a small smile. A good kid. The words echoed strangely in my mind as I smoothed my skirt down later that afternoon, my hands moving slowly across the light fabric. I reminded myself not to overthink it. This was just family, just helping with some garden work, nothing more. Still, I chose the white linen blouse that followed my shape without being too deliberate.
He left the top two buttons undone. The edge of satin piqué vert so slightly fill in the wrong way.
Not on purpose, or maybe it was. When the knock came at the back door, I felt that same flutter again, that strange rush I hadn't felt since my early I opened the door, and there he was, dressed simply jeans, a plain t-shirt, his hair casually swept back, one hand running through it. He looked relaxed, effortless. Hey, he said, stepping inside with ease. Your husband said you could use a hand. I returned a smile, gesturing toward the yard. The trellis is a mess. I appreciate it. We walked out together, the late afternoon sun casting long golden shadows across the lawn. I felt the warmth of the day cling to my skin, making the light fabric of my blouse rest a little closer than I'd intended. He followed me toward the back fence, his walk easy, unhurried, hands tucked loosely into his pockets. You always keep the place looking this nice? He asked, glancing around the garden. I try, I said, pulling my hair off my neck, feeling the heat gather along my collarbone. We worked in companionable silence, the air filled with the gentle sounds of summer birds, the distant hum of lawnmowers, the wooden creak as he hammered the trellis back into place. Now and then, our arms brushed as we moved around each other in the narrow space. Each time my breath caught, embarrassingly so, like I was someone who hadn't felt seen in a long time. I remember running through here when I was a kid, he said at one point, stepping back to admire the fixed frame. Used to drive your husband crazy. Said I trampled half the garden. I smiled at the memory. You did. His eyes met mine then, the corner of his mouth lifting ever so slightly. "You were always the one who let me off easy." The moment lingered between us, fragile, uncertain. I turned away, reaching for the watering can, needing something to do with my hands. But he stepped closer, entering my space, his voice dropping slightly. "You look really well," he said quietly. I froze, my fingers tightening around the metal handle. "Don't," I whispered, though I didn't step away. "Why not?" His tone wasn't smug. It wasn't playful. It felt. The watering can slipped from my grasp, landing with a soft thud. His hand moved to my wrist, gentle, intentional, stopping me from reaching down. His fingers stayed there, resting lightly, warm and steady. "This isn't right," I said, the words sharp on my tongue. But my reaction didn't match. I didn't step back. My heart was racing, clouding every clear thought. "You don't really believe that," he said, stepping just a little closer, close enough for me to notice his scent. Clean, simple, familiar in a way that caught me off guard. I should have stepped away, laughed it off, called my husband, done any of 100 sensible things. But when his lips touched mine, barely, softly, like a question, I didn't move. I didn't resist.
Il était à peine.
It was brief, careful, but beneath it was the tension we hadn't acknowledged. When he pulled back, just enough to see my face, his eyes searched mine, waiting for rejection, for resistance, for regret. But I stood still, brittle, caught in the quiet aftershock of something I hadn't expected to feel. He stepped back then, slowly letting go of my wrist, his hand brushing down my arm as though unsure about leaving. "I'll come by tomorrow to finish the fence," he said. His voice was calm again, like everything had gone back to normal. I didn't reply. I couldn't. I just watched him walk away, knowing, with a sharp clarity, that I wanted him to return. I didn't sleep that night, not in any meaningful way. I lay next to my husband, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing, the soft sound of the sheets as he shifted in sleep. I stared at the ceiling, still holding on to the feeling of something I shouldn't have allowed. My lips still remembered the touch, the pressure, the hesitation, the unspoken invitation.
Il était fort Guy tout comme.
For the weight of shame to settle in.
Tout Romain me watiat Toulouse.
But instead, something else stirred. A quiet ache that had been buried deep. The ache of being noticed, not as someone's spouse, not as a partner in daily routines, but as a person, as someone who could still be looked at a certain way. I turned toward my husband, watching his face in the soft light of the moon filtering through the curtains. I tried to remember the last time he had looked at me, the way his nephew had. Not with comfort, not with care, but with interest. I searched through months,
through years.
I couldn't find a moment. There had been warmth, yes, steadiness, the kind of reliable love the world tells you should be enough. And maybe for him it was. But I could feel myself drifting from that version of myself, the one who settled for kind gestures and safe affection that never stirred anything deeper. I felt like a photograph left in the sun too long, fading around the edges, losing definition where there had once been brightness. The next morning, I moved through routine like clockwork. Coffee, breakfast, a kiss on the cheek from my husband before he left, brief, familiar. I stood at the window afterward, the mug warm in my hands, staring out at the half-mended trellis. I should have made the call, told him not to come, but my hand didn't move. The words stayed unspoken. Instead, I found myself upstairs, standing at my closet longer than I meant to, running my fingers over fabrics like they held answers. It wasn't about trying to tempt anyone, not completely. It was about feeling like myself again, fully. I chose a simple summer dress, soft blue cotton, light on the shoulders, nothing too bold. But the way it followed the curve of my waist made me feel like I still had some sense of presence. I didn't put on but I let my hair down, loose waves falling along my collarbone. I told myself it didn't mean anything.
When the doorbell rang, the sound felt louder than usual, cutting through the key of the house like a blade.
I moved to answer it, my heart already racing in my chest, faster than I wanted to admit. He stood there, one hand on his hip, the other holding a small toolbox, casual as anything. His eyes met mine, and for a moment neither of us spoke. "Morning," he said finally, his voice steady. I stepped aside to let him in, my hand smoothing the skirt of my dress out of nervous habit. "Coffee?" I offered, my voice quieter than I intended. He nodded once. "Sure." In the kitchen, I busied myself with the ritual of pouring coffee, grateful for the distraction of movement, the clink of the mugs, the gentle pour of liquid, the steam rising between us. When I turned to hand him the cup, his fingers brushed mine as he took it, a soft touch that lingered slightly.
Maïsquin warmedwer et touchedme.
We moved out into the garden without another word about the day before. He worked in silence, methodical, focused on the task at hand. I hovered nearby, pretending to tidy up the flower beds, my hands slightly unsteady every time I reached down to pull a weed. I could feel the weight of his presence beside me, could feel his gaze shift toward me when he thought I wasn't looking. There was a charge in the air between us, quiet but present, a current running just beneath the surface of our every movement. At one point, reaching for the hammer, his hand met mine on the handle. Neither of us pulled away immediately. Our fingers stayed there, tangled together, holding on to the excuse of the shared task for just a moment too long. "You didn't say anything yesterday," he said, his voice low. "I didn't know what to say," I answered, my throat tight. He looked at me then, really looked, his eyes searching mine for something more than words. "You didn't stop." I swallowed hard, my hand still on the handle of the hammer. "I should have, but you didn't," he replied, not as accusation, but as quiet truth. The silence between us held everything we weren't saying, everything we knew we shouldn't lean into. He stepped back first, returning to the trellis, his focus shifting back to the work. I turned away, my hands trembling as I dug my fingers into the soil, willing the earth to ground me. But the moment had already shifted something. The line had been crossed. Not fully, not yet, but enough.